When Alex passed away, there was no bereavement or counselling. I can't even remember being asked the question. And what made it worse was because obviously I just had the babies and I needed to be checked by, you know, the staff in the hospital to make sure I was okay. They booked me an appointment in the ward where people go when they're pregnant, and I was sitting there obviously worried that I was away from Christopher. People were going behind the curtains, getting their heartbeats listened to, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking. And I thought, how can they possibly put somebody who's just lost a baby and, you know, has another one seriously ill in a room full of pregnant people? It was just so thoughtless. And I got really upset, and I said, look, I've got to get out of here. I can't sit here. I need to get back to my son. And I'll never forget her, the nurse that was taking my blood pressure. She was like, you do realise you're important as well, don't you? And I went, no, I'm not. Not at this present moment in time. I'm, you know, not important. He is. And I never went back to any more appointments in there. I just thought it was just the most awful scenario to be in when you've just lost a baby and, you know, you're in that situation.
In terms of improving patient experience, the thing that struck me more than anything was that there were things that parents suggested that health professionals could have done to make it easier for them during their stay when they'd already lost a twin. But it was such small things. There was no huge overhaul of protocols needed. It was just, first of all, an acknowledgement of the loss. Some parents said some health professionals just seemed so uncomfortable that they kind of ignored it, or emphasis on, well, at least you've got one, which is incredibly hurtful to parents who really told me that they really wanted to talk about the one that had gone. Because remember that these professionals, these nurses, are the only people who will have seen their baby alive. They're the only people they can share experiences of the short life of the baby that's died. So it was the staff member that made them a cup of tea. It was the staff member who chatted to them, who showed that they had time, which is an interesting thing because, of course, they don't have time. But to appear to have time, to say, no, I'm not busy, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a chat with you now, meant so much.
I think I look at what families have to do, either with a very sick baby or with a baby who we've all acknowledged is dying or has even died. And I look at those steps and I think, how would I cope if that was me? And what would I want? What would I think might be helpful? What would I think would be definitely not helpful? And I think I try and offer acknowledgement to the parents that I've thought about it. But of course, unless you've lost a child yourself, you can't. So I don't think you can say, you know, I know how you feel, because I haven't lost a child and I don't know how they feel. But I do think that we can acknowledge verbally and in other things that we do, that we can see how difficult it is.
I don't think anybody was particularly sensitive. I think it was just forgotten. And it was just said every day on the ward round, you know, twin one's died, twin two. But nobody mentioned it. Nobody was particularly sensitive to it. I don't even know whether all of the nurses knew. Yeah. Particularly the ones who didn't have as much to do with you as others. You know, I don't think that they would even know.
As time went on, you know, then it wasn't as recent.
So I don't think anybody was particularly sensitive, because I think it was just, well, this is our job now.
Quite a lot of our babies may have been born at other hospitals and then transferred in if they're very sick, or they may come back to us if they've been looked after in one of the other intensive care units. And that obviously sort of impacts on the sort of relationship that we build up with parents, or, you know, the relationship that we haven't built up with parents because they've not been there. And And then even more challenging would be the situation where parents suffered the loss of a twin in another hospital. So the activity around the stillbirth or the neonatal death occurred at a different place. We've never ever met that baby or ever known that baby alive or things like that. And so when those parents come to our hospital, that's really difficult. And I think that's kind of where communication becomes really important. So making sure that we know the details, the facts of the case and what happened and when and things like that, that we don't prejudge what it feels like for those parents, but that we try and acknowledge visibly with them that this must be an incredibly difficult situation. So where we have a single surviving twin baby transferred back to us, I think it would help for us to directly acknowledge with parents that we do understand what happened, even if we don't understand what it feels like to be parents, that we do know what happened, and that we offer parents an opportunity to talk about it if they want. And I know situations where that's happened and a surviving baby has come to us and we never knew the twin who died. And when I've reflected on those situations, I'm absolutely sure we didn't do enough to show parents we acknowledge what's happened.
So Harrison got to the point where he'd had heart surgery in London, and that was the thing he needed to stay alive. And he was well enough then to transfer back to our local hospital in the northeast. So we transferred in, and I suppose they were expecting us. There's somebody coming, there's another baby. And as far as I can recall, that's where the introduction ended. I didn't feel like there was any understanding. The notes are there. You can skim through the notes and say, this infection, that infection, that infection, all up, down, oh, he's not had a good time, but we're here now. And that's how it felt. And that wasn't even from everybody. And it certainly wasn't from the nurses that cared for him 24 hours a day. I felt they didn't know anything about him, really. They didn't know anything about us. I remember very vividly on the whiteboard next to his incubator were the words twin 2, somebody going, oh, well, you don't need that, and wiping it out. So it's almost like, well, we're going to start fresh now. We've got a single baby. No link up between the fact that, yes, you have a single baby here, but these people, this family, have just been to hell and back, and the unthinkable has happened to them weeks ago. I think it was like they expected us to be happy. And we were, in our own way. We know where Harrison is now is better than he ever was. But we weren't ready for jumping for joy, happiness. We still had a funeral to plan and a baby to cremate and a decision to make about what to do with our child's ashes.
There was quite a few people that I felt like I had to explain the situation because they didn't know, which it wasn't their fault. But for me, having to put myself through telling that story, 5 or 6 times a week, it was heartbreaking for me. Especially, when you do tell a story and quite a number of people, nurses, had the reply of, oh, well, at least you've still got one. And that came out of the midwife who looks after multiple pregnancies in the hospital. So that wasn't really a comment I appreciated, to be honest. I think it's horrendous that people forget when you've had twins or triplets and you've lost one or two. They must be briefed. If they're looking after your child, they must in a handover be told what the situation is. It's just, that's what I would have expected to happen, especially because we were in there for 4 months.
We always try to write twin 1 and twin 2 and leave it there. The boards change, things get rubbed off. There's always a chance that that might change, but we usually always try and, so if we've only got one baby left on the unit, we would still call them twin 1 or twin 2. It's the identity of the baby, to have a name, and I think if they've got a name, then the name should stay there. And I think it makes it much easier to talk to a family about the baby that they've lost if there's a name, because it makes it a bit more real and a bit more personal.
I try very carefully to acknowledge the identity of the family, which I think is the new thing at that point in their lives. So they've become a family, and then if their baby dies, perhaps they feel as if they're not a family anymore, but actually, of course, they still are. And I also try and acknowledge verbally the fact that the baby who's died will always be a part of that family, and actually will be a part of family life. Because again, I think if you've just lost your baby, you have no idea what's coming, you've no idea what that's going to feel like. And I think there might be this sort of potential feeling of just total loss, and actually I don't think that's the case at all. So of course there's an enormous loss, but a baby who has been part of your family remains part of your family, in the same way that, our elderly relatives who aren't in our families anymore, they're still there, they're still talked about, we still share their stories. So I try very hard to both acknowledge it and help parents maybe to see that, because I think at that point they maybe won't see that. But the acknowledgement of the baby as part of the ongoing family, actually I think is really important. And, where there's more than one child born at one time, so where they're not just siblings separated by time, but, twin, triplet, whatever, I think that identity as part of the family is perhaps stronger and can be protected a little bit more, I think, maybe.